And
let's go.
if you give me some screen share, then I will be right with you.
You should have already.
It says someone else is sharing.
Oh, because I'm sharing the sound. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Thanks.
forgot. Yeah.
Oh no, we love the sound. You know that.
Yeah, but I
We
forgot
love the
to
music.
stop it at a certain point. All right.
Okay, great. All right, welcome back, everybody. It's so good to see you. Happy Monday. So today we are moving into our third session of our media training series on climate change and food security. I didn't notice, but if you have not been with us in session 1 or 2, we would be delighted if you would put your name and your affiliation into the chat box and introduce yourself. And if those of you who've been with us want to introduce yourself, that's great too. So welcome back. And I'm going to ask one quick poll. And I just want to know, how was the weekend? And so how did it go? Did you enjoy your weekend? Do we have a poll for this? Ah, bravo. Okay, so let's just talk about how was the weekend. We can reflect back rather than talk about what mood we're in today. All right, if you could cast your votes, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, we got responses coming in. Let's give it a few more seconds. I can tell you I can already tell you it's quite a mix, I guess. It makes it interesting. All right,
Absolutely
one more vote, folks.
Come on.
One more? Oh, yes. That's good. Oh, one more
Okay.
again. All right, I'm going to end it now.
Okay, great. All right.
And sharing the results.
Fantastic. Oh, look at this. Yeah. All right. Nobody caught up on their sleep, but some people had a very relaxing weekend. For many, it was a bit too short. And for the majority, it was a working weekend. So, or for a lot of us, it was a working weekend. So thank you so much for letting us know. And we'll continue to hope that people do have relaxing weekends coming up. So just to tell you, just quickly remind you that we've got a fantastic team behind this training. You've met Sabrina and I, and today we're delighted to have Dr. Baitsi Podisi, who is the regional program coordinator for CATAB-XP and with Cardessa, and so monumental oversight for us. And we're just delighted that he was able to also join us. Great team from communications and research. You've met Pierre, Serge, and David are online, and perhaps Bridget and others. And we have a fantastic lineup of guest speakers in our series. And we're all excited because today, Patricia Gichinga is joining us from MEDI, and I'll tell you a bit more about that as we move forward. So overall, our training objectives have been to create these networks around climate change, agriculture with media representatives across the continent to enhance awareness around science-based insights on ag and climate change, and to how to develop stories that are simple and powerful and accurate, that resonate with people's lives who are dealing with climate change. So we're on our third session. So we will be talking a lot about communicating evidence. We're going to talk about mass movements and mass actions. And then we're going to do a little bit of work on scenarios as well, and then focus in on climate change in radio and television. So today it's about communicating evidence, mass movements and actions. That'll be followed by Patricia. We'll have a good Q&A session with her, and then we'll do some work on our scenario development. So quick question for the chat box. When I must explain what climate change is to people that I meet, I say, so if I could invite you to fill in the blank on the chat box, and let's just see if how do you describe climate change when you meet people? And it's okay to say, I don't, but do tell us if you do, how do you describe it? And let's see, I see some introductions in the chat. Are we getting some responses here? All right, unpredictable weather patterns. Dorcas, thank you for that. And do we have others that describe it? How do I describe it?
And there's no wrong answers here.
Brava, thank you for that. Yes, changes in the weather patterns. All right, very good. Rainfall, frequency of drought. All right. Okay. Thank you, Neo. All right, do you have a response there? Yes. Okay, we're getting a lot of changes in the weather patterns. So that's really useful for us to hear how you describe it. And then I am going to invite for one more, I explained kind of, as I say, disruption. Thank you, Neo. That's fantastic. All right. So now I'm just going to ask a little bit harder question. And I'm going to invite you to say that I typically say climate change impacts, like those droughts, like those floods, are caused by. And let's just see what's in the mix there. What causes those climate change impacts, those disruptions in weather patterns? All right, thank you, Mr. P. People's behavior, human action. All right, getting down to the bottom of it. Yes, a warming climate. Thank you, Basani. Thank you, Sandra, Ani, Chimwemwe. All right, so we know that there's some causes out there that we can potentially address, right? So we're not going to dwell too much on these questions right now, but I'm really delighted to see a lack of care for the environment. Thank you for that. Our behavior towards the environment. Human activities. Well done. All right. So we don't necessarily love describing climate change, but we know what causes it. All right. So thanks for that. Now, just one more check-in. I know everyone has been following COP26. We're just entering the second week. What was the most interesting story you've heard coming out of COP26? I know you've been following all the journalists. Some of you may even be there. And what's the most interesting story? Sabrina, you've got one.
Well, I read it this morning on the BBC. Well, actually, my sister, who's who's not into climate change as much, but she messaged me and she was horrified. And I read the article from the BBC today. They did an analysis of all the COP26 delegates, and the biggest group represented is the fossil fuel industry. So the most delegates at COP26 are linked to the fossil fuel industry. So I was really shocked by that and realized you've got such a strong lobby power group who's at the climate conference, and you realize what must be happening, influencing the decisions and the negotiations when you've got so many people from one lobby group. So that was an article I was really shocked by.
Absolutely. Well, are there others? Thank you for telling us that. That's really pretty horrifying. And they are calling it the least inclusive COP that we've had. I know there's a lot of travel issues, but so I wanted I'm going to lower my screen now and just check in and see if anyone else wants to tell us what came out of COP26 that you've seen. All right, look at this. We've got Annie says we are operating at 2.7 degrees. This is alarming. Busani brought us a bit of good news, pledges for forest funding for developing. Whoops, I just lost my chat box. So fantastic. And what else? Yeah, pledges for forest funding. So there was this huge issue, activity that came out the first week about reducing deforestation, if not eliminating by the end of the decade. So utilization of resources. Chimwala, COP26 was an article saying it failed. PR strategy. Oh dear. Okay. All right. I am seeing a little bit more bad news than good. So I'm glad everyone's following, because this is going to be our work for a long time. Thank you so much. And with that, Sabrina, take us into climate change policy and where the media can influence. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Constance. So before we hand over to Patricia, our very esteemed guest speaker, and I know a lot of you want to hear about how they've done such amazing work with Shamba Shape Up. We've just got a section now we're going to sort of discuss around where the media has kind of a critical role in sort of shaping articles and how it fits into this kind of policy landscape. And then we'll be discussing a little bit about information, disinformation, and trying to give some kind of critical tips around evidence as media stakeholders you can bring in when discussing climate change. So this figure just tries to give a sense, whichever country you're sitting within, or wherever you're represented, there'll be multiple layers of climate agreements and climate goals, strategies, and different levels. So if you see at the top, and this is what's happening right now, these kind of global level commitments and conferences. So the Paris Agreement is the more kind of legally binding agreement, which countries negotiate towards, which says what are their emissions they agree to. And then if we take, for example, within a continental level, we've got our Africa Agenda 2063, which gives the kind of continent some direction. And then we have the SDGs, which take us to 2030, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. And then even within different communities, if we take, for example, Southern Africa, there is also a regional kind of economic community, and they'll have their own climate change strategy. And then if we take the country context, what you'll have is these multiple different agendas and bills. So there'll be lots of things happening around adaptation, mitigation. We've got the nationally determined contributions, where countries lay out what they'll be doing in terms of addressing climate change and reducing emissions, where their investments will be going. And we've also got lots of linked development plans in terms of post-COVID. There's a lot of I'm sure you would have heard the slogan, Build Back Better. So there's a lot of post-COVID recovery plans. And then sitting within this, and I think framing a lot of the work we've been discussing over the last few sessions, is there's these longer term climate resilient development plans. So this is taking us out to 2050 and beyond. So we just wanted to sort of start today's session by layering in that there's a lot happening from the kind of national context, and all of these development goals and trajectories are happening at the same time. So as media personnel, it's really useful to be aware of this wider landscape, and knowing as these decisions and as these kind of different action frameworks are happening, there's a lot of influence that can go in. Because within this, there's both the science and development considerations that are impacting these goals. And this is where the role of media and information to come across becomes so important, and bringing across both the science that's coming, for example, from the IPCC, which is the kind of leading scientific body where I'm sure in some of your articles you draw information, and that kind of contributes towards the wider policy landscape. And then there's also these kind of different timelines. So it's also really useful potentially in your articles, and when you're trying to kind of frame or create a kind of very compelling argument, is you might be reporting on a flood in a specific time. So we might be in 2021, or we heard, for example, in Ghana, they're having a very extreme unknown rainy season right now. This shouldn't be raining. And so Godfred was saying, giving the example of how they're trying to report on this. But then in your article, what would be very useful and very convincing is to start to layer in, okay, so what is the timeline? What are the other targets taking us to? And this is where you can try and bring more of a compelling argument to say, the science is telling us that we need to go to a certain level. And it was really nice already, a couple of you have mentioned about COP26 is taking us towards a kind of 2.7 degree target. And we know we need to be trying to be at 1.5 degrees. So it's just to say, just an awareness of being able to say, okay, in my country, maybe what is the key climate? Where is my NDC right now? What is the National Development Plan? Do we have a long-term strategy? So just in your sort of the meat of your article or your depending if you're doing radio or TV, it's quite useful sometimes to really touch those stakeholders that are working in policy or development planning by talking about some of these strategies. And this links into sort of another thing about using the power of surprise and using the power of kind of big, policy makers, etc., within media and the role of evidence. And I think, I think they've done this really well. We've got an example here from Ghana at COP26, where really using the pavilion space, so using a kind of convening space, they've used the power of a very sort of influential musician and also the president to come together to kind of put this clock together, which really tries to visually show how long we have counting down, where we know we have to make changes by 2030. And so it's this sort of like using the power of surprise, and as media focal points, how do you then leverage off a story like this to tell a wider story? Here you'll see the clock says renewables. How do you then unpack the role of energy or clean energy emissions? So you might see this as a headline, but then how can you use it to unpack some of the wider story around climate change and also be able to take your audience on a sort of much more future looking trajectory? So explain, why are we looking to 2030? Why are we looking beyond? And using the power of surprise. And I think we had some questions in the second session. So we've just, in terms of one of the key issues is how do you really convince an editor, or if you are trying to get climate change stories into the mass media? And I know we've heard about the importance of, say, if it's on social media, on clicks and engagement. So really, again, trying to say, what is the wider linkage of the work I'm doing to this climate story? So we've just talked about policy, and we've seen some of the wider policy landscape. Can you link it to something around energy, around transport, potentially conservation? Is there another linkage to your main angle? And then thinking about impacts. Can you say who's been impacted? We've heard about the storytelling importance, and can you really pull out which local communities have been involved, either impacted or involved, and make sure there's a really strong link between the story you create on this local community and your main thrust. Again, we sort of have this perfect storm of multiple impacts happening right now, and COVID-19 continues to be obviously a global pandemic, and so drawing linkages to how potentially the pandemic is affecting climate change plans. Is it affecting, for example, has money been diverted from public health away from, for example, investment in renewable energy? Can you draw the connection between how health and climate are linked? Can you try and create more of a sort of string? And I think Godfred said it really nicely about the golden thread to a story. So can you create more of a linkage? And then solutions, again, trying to see about being very sort of positive in your linkages. How have communities in your area been impacted? And then again, like we've just shown, some of these larger frameworks, can we talk about, is there investment in terms of carbon? Is there in terms of your national development plans, in terms of the nationally determined contributions, which is where governments put their climate plans together. So these are sort of some pitching advice around how do you bring out the wider linkage with the climate change or agriculture sort of linked story. And sometimes this framework is used for applying trends, and we use it within our foresight work quite a lot. And we thought it was quite useful here to also say, within your story, can you use this framework? So they call it the STEEP framework in terms of what's the social part and what's the technological linkage? Is there an economic dimension to the story? And then obviously around ecological or environmental. And is there a political or a policy? So potentially when you're drafting a story or you're putting together an idea for a radio program, or you're trying to link link in something, this framework might be quite helpful to say, have I thought of all angles of my story? And I'm just keeping a good check of time. So I'll just now that I've framed a little bit around where are the linkages, we just wanted to unpack a little bit around evidence. And when we say evidence and bringing in evidence to your work, there can be many, many sources, and we've just tried to define some of these. This comes from the work Constance and I do around a decision hub called Shared, where we do a lot around evidence-based decision making. And so to define evidence, we either have scientific evidence, where we can draw on the role of different scientists or researchers and scientific journals. We then have practice and implementation. So we have lots of people working in NGOs, working in practical, very sort of intervention-focused work, who are doing things on the ground related to climate change. And then you have participatory or consultative evidence. You could say, this is something that's coming out of COP26. This is different focal points that are meeting and discussing. How can we package what's happening from there and bring that kind of evidence into our work? And really critically, and I think Constance mentioned this, one of the things about COP26 that's coming out is really that it's very bad in terms of very limited inclusion and very limited access and voice for local and Indigenous voices and stories. And so this becomes very critical in terms of bringing out climate-related work. And then there's obviously qualitative data, which looks at who, which, what, when, where, and why. So that is really helpful also for framing some of the story. And then quantitative. So we think of how many, can you be compelling in terms of percentage of people impacted, how much, to what extent, etc. And then obviously within this work, there's many types of compelling evidence. And we're really, really happy to have Patricia here, who's going to be talking about how compelling the use of visuals and local stories and making stories really impactful to get across different information to different audiences. So we have the role of testimonials. Then you have also things to bring into stories, such as maps or graphs. Can these really help get across a point, or do they make the issue too complicated for the audience that you're trying to impact? So this is just to show that there are many different types of audience. And also around stakeholders, really trying to say, who are the stakeholders that I need to bring in to discuss? Who I might be just interviewing someone very kind of targeted with my story. But if I'm talking about, and we heard one example from Zambia last week to say, how do we report about deforestation? So who do we need to talk to? Do we need to talk to a charcoal maker on the ground? Do we need to talk to a policymaker? Maybe an extensionist, a trader involved in it, a farmer, someone from the Ministry of Finance, someone who deals with the science around deforestation or charcoal, etc. So it's just to say there are many wide stakeholders to engage. And then also to really bring across, again, this with visuals, and this will lead into Patricia's discussion, is how do we harness the power of storytelling and also using sometimes shock tactics. Coming into COP26, Greenpeace ran a big campaign to try and really sort of show what the world might look like if we choose the right option or if we choose the wrong option. So they profiled different cities in Europe and then chose 2050 as our kind of benchmark timeline and made a series of different visuals like this to show Rome in 2050 could be a desert, for example, or Madrid in 2050, who's decided to invest in renewables and green urban spaces, becomes a really nice functioning city. So this is just to show the importance of harnessing and the power of storytelling. And after we've had the discussion with Patricia, we'll go on to a little bit around information and disinformation. So Constance, if you would like to, I'll stop my share, and if it's okay to introduce Patricia, that'd be fantastic, and we will hand over.
Absolutely delighted. Thank you so much, Sabrina. That was really a nice session. So I'm very excited that we have Patricia Gichinga joining us. She's the head of productions at Media Company, And she uses educational and entertaining media that are highly effective on impacting people's knowledge, their attitudes, and their practices. And she's produced and directed dramas like Makutano Junction in Kenya, Mapeki Town in Uganda, reality shows such as Shamba Shape Up, Shamba Chef, and Don't Lose the Plot. So really excited to welcome Patricia. I just really thank you so much, Patricia, for joining us. And if you want to share your screen, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for that introduction. I will just share my screen now. So can you all see my screen?
We can, if we could get it into a presentation mode, or perhaps maybe slideshow.
Yeah, let me do that.
Thank you.
You as a slideshow. There we go.
Brava. Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much for having me in this session. I'm so grateful to share our experience on what we do here at Media. And so thank you so much. And just, meeting everybody in this session, it's quite interesting. So I'll just give a little background of what we do here at Media. And basically what we do is we support education and development using media. So we do a lot of communication programs. So we do a lot of TV, radio, and also use print and mobile. And our model is very simple. We try and entertain and also meet people's informational needs. That way we build big audiences and we're able to serve both the commercial sector and the development sector. Just to give you a background where we started back with a radio program called Tembea na Majira, which means walking with the times. And we used to, feature a lot of social issues, a bit of agricultural issues. And it was a drama soap, so back in the 90s. And this went on for a period of about 8 years. And by the time it was getting to 2002, we found that our audience was actually reducing. So we were moving from an 8 million audience to about 2 million. So we decided to do some research to find out what was happening. And around that time in Kenya, what was happening is that the government had regulated the FM stations. So we no longer had just one radio station. We had now more stations coming in. These were FM stations, which was mostly music, and then a call-in session on how to get a good guy, or, just really random stuff. And then the other thing that was happening around that time is that in the market, there was this little Great Wall of China TV set that was coming into the market. So people were then buying that and using a battery to, light it up and watch television. So radio was becoming sort of like a background issue. So with that kind of research, we decided, what, we needed to now shift and move into, television. So we started with, some television programs such as Makutano Junction, which has an audience of about 6 million. And with Makutano, we did a lot of issues. We did government issues. We did things to do with HIV and TB. We did agricultural stuff. And every time we did something on agriculture, it stemmed a lot of interest from people. So from our research, we found that our audience was, 70% was rural and peri-urban. So, we thought we needed to have something for them. So we started Shamba Shape Up. But even before we went on to Shamba Shape Up, we have, these are our main programs that we've been doing. So we have No Zone, which is a kids program, and it goes out every week. So kids who are in grade 2, 4, and 6, whatever they learn that week, they're able to watch it on Saturday morning. And then we have Mpeke Town, which is our drama series in Uganda, which focuses on getting youth, women, and families to look at farming as a business. So we're tackling a lot on climate change issues, financial access, how do you get people banked, how do they know how to grow their matoke? So there's a lot of issues we're doing that. Then we have Don't Lose a Plot. Don't Lose a Plot is interesting because it came from Shamba Shape Up. When we go looking for, farms, we found that the youth were not really engaging in farming. So we thought we needed to start something. So essentially, Don't Lose the Plot is a reality program where we have 4 young people, a boy and a girl from Kenya and Tanzania. So there are 4 people in one farm. And then each is given 1 acre of land to farm, and whoever made the most money in the most sustainable way won an investment back to their family farm. So that was really interesting. And then we have Shamba Chef, which is stems off from Shamba Shape Up, again, focusing on nutrition and clean energy. For those who maybe have not had the opportunity to watch Shamba Shape Up, I'm just going to play a little trailer about it, and then I can take you through, the impact. So. Great. So that is Shamba Shape Up, and essentially it's a makeover on smallholder farms. So what we do is, working with our partners, we go around looking for farms. We're not looking for perfect farms. So we look for farms that have problems. So for example, we may go to Mary's farm and she may tell us, I have problems with my beans. They're not producing as much, or my chickens are not laying enough eggs. Or, I planted some fruit trees and now they're not really doing well. So working with our experts, we go in and make it over. And the thing with Shamba Shape Up, it's not a talk down sort of program. It's very entertaining. So we have 2 presenters and then we have the experts. So the presenters, they go in between to ask the questions as the farmers learn. So we've been doing this for the last 11 years. And what we tend to do is we start to broadcast in March in Kenya, because this is the growing season in Kenya. So we start tackling issues such as how to, you need to soil test, you need to use the right fertilizer, you need to use certified seeds. And then, we just follow the growing season. So towards the end, we're talking about, how do you harvest correctly? How do you access markets? So that's how we've been doing it. And right now our audience figures are about 8 million weekly, and we go out on Saturday and Sunday at 1:30. And this sometimes is repeated again in the short growing season in Kenya. So this is again from September to January. So the content is always, fresh. Working with partners, we are able to, co-create this content. And what we tend to do is, because we're not just creating a television program just for fun, is we also want to know, what do the farmers think? What do we know that are people actually learning anything from it? What are we doing right? What do we need to do more? So we do something called a CAP study. And a CAP study is basically, we're looking at the knowledge, attitude, and practice before the program airs, because we know what issues we are going to tackle. And we do that with 1,000 people. So 500 of them have a TV, 500 have a TV but don't watch the program. So, and then at the end of the series, we do the same thing. We do an end line. So we're going back, talking to 1,000 people. 500 of them have watched the show and have a TV. 500 of them have a TV and haven't watched the show. And our main thing is to try and, educate, because once people know, this is why I'm doing this is why I need to test my soil. This is why I need to use the right fertilizer. They're able then to link them to inputs. They're able to see the value of getting into inputs. And then once that is sorted, we're trying to also then link them to financial services, because a lot of farmers will not have the finances to, pick up some of these interventions that we're showing. And then at the end, we're also trying to link them to markets. So for us, this is the 4 areas that we try and focus on. One of the things that we did earlier in the series, I think after the 4th year, was there was a big piece of research done by Reading University, Buckingham, and it was funded by the AECF. And they went down to 13,000 farms, and then scaled down to 2,500. And those people who had said they'd watched the show, they were asked, let me show you, let me know who the presenters are. Let's see your medicine cabinet, because we're only focusing on two things, maize and dairy. And we found that the direct access, the people who would watch the program and said they had made changes, we found that 428,000 households had actually increased profits just by watching Shamba Shape Up and adapting some of these things. And these were simple technologies such as how to make silage. When it came to planting your maize, it was, are you using the right seed? Are you using the correct spacing? So it was a really big piece of research that was done around that time. Going on to Shamba Shape Up now, our main focus right now is on climate change adaptation. And this is for the next, 5 years. We've been doing this within every farm that we go. We're looking at something, like when we talk to farmers, they don't say it's climate change, but they say something to do with variable weather. So people will say, we knew it would actually rain on the 15th of March every year. But now when you ask them, they're like, oh, we're not sure if it's going to rain. We're not sure if these are the rains. So, it's basically variable weather. So what we've done is actually now adapted our content and into, climate change. And one of the things that we found is that people don't have knowledge on when it'll rain. So where do you get information about the weather? So, we've been running a campaign called Let It Rain. And here is we tell people to make a guess. Do you know when the rains will start in your county? And people will have all sorts of dates. And it's a competition, but we are also making it really creative that if you guess the right date, you stand a chance to win, $10,000 for the county. So, we've played that with people, and we also get more information from them. And then with that information, we are also giving them, different places that they can access, more about the weather. So those are some of the innovative things that we're doing. So in terms of, crops and different things that we're looking at, we're looking at crops, conservation, agriculture, livestock. We're also looking at financial inclusion, because a lot of these things cannot be done if you don't have, access to finance. With Shamba Shape Up, when we started, what we found that just doing a TV show was not enough. A lot of people would watch it, go into the website, find the company, find a number which was then linked to our director, David, and they would call him and say, what, my cow is sick, or, my maize is not doing well. So the more we got this, we decided we needed to back up more information for these farmers. And we started something called iShamba, and iShamba is essentially a backup system for Shamba Shape Up. So here we have a call center. Farmers are registered, and today we have 500,000 farmers on our database. We know where they are, we know what they're growing. And once a person watches Shamba Shape Up and they join, they're able to receive two things. They're able to receive information on maybe the crops and livestock that they choose. They also receive the weather information, for the area they are. They're also, we're also able to target them with very specific message. So for example, if Mary signs up from Kakamega, we find out where she is. She says she's interested in maize and beans and maybe dairy. We start asking her, how far is your maize, or I've just planted. So then she starts receiving very event-based messaging like, okay, you've just planted. In 3 weeks time, you need to, start weeding. Or if it's your cow, it's in calf, this is how you need to feed it until it calves down. So that's what we do. The weather is crucial for farmers because especially now, nobody knows if the rains are coming or not. So we work with different providers in order to get that information to people. What's interesting with iShamba is that with farmers who are actually we do have the freemium version and a premium version. The freemium version are for all the farmers who are in. We did pilots trying to get them after 3 years receiving this message to become premium farmers, but we only got a 2% sign up. People didn't leave, but people also did not want to pay for this information. So, we had also to think about. So what is interesting with the premium farmers is that they're on WhatsApp groups, and it's amazing. It has a lot of information. So how it works is we, work with the experts and with our content partners to develop these agri tips. The farmers receive them on their mobile phone as a text message. And then the farmers apply the tips and practices that they're getting. And that way they're able to, increase their yields. We've done a lot of research with iShamba just to see what the impact has been. And for example, with the potatoes farmers, we found that we did a thing where we had 2,000 farmers who received messaging, 2,000 farmers who did not receive messaging. And we found that the ones who received messaging doubled their yield. So an example of the WhatsApp group, which is really, really amazing. We've been working with GIZ. We found that it's evolved from people sending us pictures of the things that they're getting in terms of, or what disease is this, to more now farmers actually selling to each other. So, here's somebody asking for bomber rods, 50 bills, and there's someone who's saying, get in touch with this. So it's become a platform where farmers are also now speaking to each other in terms of markets, and just developing a lot of linkages, because a lot of them are in the same area. So we have 5 different WhatsApp groups in different localities. The other thing that we found is when working with youth, we found that a lot of them don't have an idea of how much anything costs. So we decided to develop something called Budget Mkononi. And essentially, this is just a web-based thing that people can click in and say, I want to do chickens. And you want to start with 500 of them. And it kind of gives you a rolling budget. What do you need every week? What is required of you every week? And you can actually even just edit. So we have different value chains on it. We've also had a WhatsApp version for it, which has really, really worked well, especially with these younger farmers who, they want things quick and they want it on their mobile phones. Again, backing up all our information and all the stuff we do, we also do leaflets. We have a very interactive system behind us. We have Africa Knowledge Zone, where all our work is available, free for people to download. We are also on social media because, again, there's a lot of interaction with that. And we have iShamba, and also now the different value chain booklets that we also produce. What has been sort of like our key learning? We know that edutainment can drive affordable scalability. Using mass media is very powerful. We're reaching 8 million people every week with messaging. We know that through our research, we found that we can change behavior change just by showing people, something practical. So we're not showing it one time. It's not one documentary. It's something that has to be consistent over time, that people can see it many times. And that's the only way you can sort of like get behavior change. We also know that using the edutainment model does build big audiences. So, we started out at about 2 million viewers, and now we're at 8 million, and growing. So we know that using the model of edutainment can grow those big audiences, and that way support, the uptake of different agricultural activities. So that has been sort of like our experience. And we don't work alone again. We work with funding partners, because for us to be able to make the program, there's a cost to it. And then we also work with content partners. So, these are, the biodiversity, SIA, GIZ, who have the content and are wanting to scale it out. So that's essentially how we work on Shamba Shape Up. So recently, we just got funding from DEEV USAID to scale into Uganda. So we'll be producing a Shamba Shape Up version in Uganda. So it will be in English and Luganda. So everything will be based on the value chains that they're growing there. So very different from what we're doing in Kenya. And there's also a big piece of research being done. So there's an RCT component being done with it. We haven't done that before, but then it will be showing like what is the uptake of some of these educational programs, and what are their impact when it comes to the economy. Are farmers going to actually make money? Are they going to increase their yields, and that way consequently make money from that? So yeah, so in a nutshell, that's what Media and Shamba Shape Up is all about.
Oh, brilliant. This has just been amazing. And I see the comments coming in. Can we please give Patricia a round of applause? The kinds of comments you're getting are very interesting. Someone loved the concept of don't lose the plot, and so amazing. So you're getting lots of applause. Thank you so much, Patricia. What I'd love to do is open the floor and get some questions for you so we can learn from you in some other details. So Busani, do you want to take the floor? You have a question in the chat box. Getting a lot of wows. Busani, would you take the floor?
Thank you so much, Constance. Hi, Patricia. Delighted with your presentation. Great. I'll actually put out a question. I was just keen to understand how sustainable is the iShamba platform, given that you mentioned that farmers are not keen to, in fact, pay for information, and because how will you be able to scale this out? Maybe you could just tell us about your experience there.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So with iShamba, yes, it's been difficult to get farmers because I think farmers all over the world are not willing to pay for information. Again, it's not a tangible, object that they have, so they don't know what exactly they're paying. So for us, what we've done is actually change our model. Instead of getting farmers to pay, we're working with partners who have farmers so that they actually pay for their farmers to receive that messaging. So for example, working with a commercial partner like M-Copper, who are going into the agricultural space, they have farmers who've taken these loans, either to get electricity or buy a water tank or drip irrigation. So what we do is when someone is signed up for that, we sign them up. So M-Copper gives us the contact, and M-Copper pays for this person to be a premium farmer. And this person, once they become a premium farmer, they're receiving messages from us. So what we do is once we're giving them information is that they then can farm better, make more money, repay their loan, and also respect this organization who's just not, out to get their money, but also is interested in their livelihoods. So we've done that with different stakeholders. So working with GIZ, they have, farmers in Western Kenya who are dealing in poultry. So they signed them up. We co-create the message with them, and then now start sending out this messaging. So that has been the model we are now using more and more, as opposed to farmers. We have like a 2% sign up with individual farmers who actually pay, and these are actually the more maybe urban farmers, the telephone farmers who are always calling and need all this information. Yeah, that has been our experience.
Wow, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that response. I just want to see if there are any other questions before I raise one, or Sabrina does. I can see that we're both available for questions. I guess I wanted to build on something that happened to us last week, which was very much about, working with scientists, and how do you cultivate good relationships with scientists, no matter your media. And I know that from my side, the scientists that I work with that have worked with you, they just love how you showed such an interest. So I wonder if you would make a comment about, befriending scientists so that you can get at some of that data. And then I can see that we may have another question in the wings. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, for us working with content partners and especially scientists, because I think what we found when we were starting Shamba Shape Up is that there was so much valuable information that was just sitting around and not really getting down to the farmers. And yes, and this was understandable. Scientists are doing what they're supposed to do, and really maybe dissemination was not, their key focus. So for us, it's been such a wonderful, collaboration, with the scientists. And I think for journalists, I think that should also be something that people should be harnessing, because there's a lot of information from these people. And then now just packaging that information from a very scientific way to a very simple way that somebody on the ground can kind of understand. So that co-creation and, of content together is really, really great. And some of the materials that are available are just excellent, just waiting to be taken and distributed to the various platforms. So I urge any, people in communication, journalists, yes, do make scientists your best friends.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. P, I believe it's Patrick. Do you want to take the floor? I see you have a question. Patrick, can you unmute? And if we can't hear you, let's just go ahead and read the question. Oh, Mr. P, I see you've unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, I just want to ask this question, which is they said that about the Shamba Shape Up. In youth, we can say that we have the number of youth are now greatly increasing in numbers. And how do the youth evolve in the information they gain from this program? At the same time, to be utilized on the ground as far as the environment and the agriculture it is concerned on environmental issue.
Great, thank you, Mr. P, for that question. For us, youth and women are key focus in everything we do. So we've made it quite mandatory that when we're visiting farms, we're visiting very youth or women-led farms because we've made that decision. And this has been stemmed from years of doing this. We've been doing this for 11 years, and we found that the youth were not getting in, involved in farming. So we found that it would be the old folks just trying to farm, and those people are not really going to change so much because they just want to grow a bit of maize, have their one dairy cow. So they were not doing much. So for us, even when we are doing the show, the Shamba Shape Up show, we do bring in that conversation, even with the old folk. We'll be like, okay, but you have your 4 acres here, but your son John is he's just in town sitting in a boda. Why are you not, letting him farm? Because again, in Africa, land is a big issue. Land inheritance is a big issue. So for us, we're trying to, bring that on Shamba Shape Up, and that is what stemmed us to start Don't Lose the Plot. It was to show, and one of the interesting things that we saw when we were doing Don't Lose the Plot is that the youth did not want to farm the same things that their parents were farming. So they didn't want to do the maize, they didn't want to do the beans. They wanted crops that were actually coming to fruition much shorter. So they did, spinach and kale. They did onions. They wanted to keep chickens. Things that their parents necessarily would not want to put. And we also really encourage that conversation within the family setups, even as we are actually doing, the show and filming.
Thank you so much. All right, we have, I think, about 3 questions in the wings, if you don't mind. First of all, we've got Chimwemwe. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, the question is, do you only work with media houses that deals with climate change or any kind of media houses? And what are the challenges that you are facing when you are working with those media houses?
Okay, thank you so much for that question. So the way we structure is that media, we do the programming and then we broadcast on Citizen, which is the biggest broadcaster in Kenya. And the reason we do it, we give them the program for free. And the reason we do that is that because it has a larger audience than all these other TV stations, for us, it's getting that message out there. That being said, we don't limit. On our own platform. We have, the African knowledge zone that we put all our work. We're able to, again, let people download that work. So for us, the main actually challenge working with broadcasters is that in Africa and in East Africa in generally, you cannot, have the program in multiple choice, in multiple stations. There's no way Citizen will allow you to have Shamba Shape Up with them and then go to NTV, and they won't allow that, which is really selfish. But then, what to do? We don't have our own station. So that's been usually the biggest challenge. The other challenge is that in times when there is a drought, the commercial sector is not able to come in, and we need the commercial sector because you need to show the products, and the products have to be available to where the farmers are. So that's a challenge. And if there's an election year, and because we've built this big audience around Saturday and Sunday at 1:30, the politician will come and pay and get that slot because they know everybody's waiting for Shamba Shape Up. So those are the kind of challenges we experience.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, Chimwemwe. Dr. Podisi, I just wanted to see if you wanted to make a comment or ask a question since you've joined us for this particular guest speaker. Right, see? And if I'm catching you off guard. I know that Sabrina has a question, but let me just check. Baitsi, would you like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, I'm not seeing that, but I know that he's here and enjoying this. Sabrina, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Patricia. And I think, yeah, I hope you're seeing all the comments in the chat box about how much everybody's learning. Yeah, so thank you so much for highlighting. I guess it's just trying to think about how to, obviously a lot of thought has gone into the story and the narrative. Maybe what tips you have for kind of our audience who are working in different, radio programs or editorial, like how do you condense all that sort of knowledge into one story? If they have to report on a climate or an agriculture related event and make the within their sort of medium. I guess it's just to say, how do you condense all the sort of like the narrative and the building that goes into something like Shamba Shape Up, and how do you take tips and skills from that into a shorter turnaround time, basically? I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. So for us, I think we use a very simple communication strategy. The first thing is, who do we want to talk to? So who are we speaking to? Once we've identified who our audience is, are we talking to people in the rural community? What sector are we saying? And then what do we want to tell them? That's crucial to us. So it's climate change, but what do we want to say? Then how are we going to tell it to them? So for us, that's a very simple way we try and create a narrative. And then one thing our director does, our executive director, is he puts us to task and tells us to write things to do with climate change as if you're writing a letter to your grandmother. So it has to be in the simplest language possible, because that's the way the audience will understand it. So for us, it's again crafting, sitting down with different content partners, and then just coming up with creative ways of how do we communicate this in a 3 minutes video or in a 5-minute segment. So very simple. So who, what, and how are we going to say it?
Oh, I
Brilliant.
like that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I don't know if there's any other, are there any other questions for Patricia? I know we've kept you a little while, so I just wanted to round up if there are any more questions from the floor. No, it doesn't look like it. So yeah, thank you. Well, Patricia, we'll make sure to share all the links, and we're creating kind of an event page for the whole series with all the recordings, etc. And then we'll make sure to, I just put into the chat about the African Knowledge Center as you mentioned it, but we'll make sure to share everything. And just just really a huge thank you on behalf of everybody here for just a really insightful presentation and lots of tips and advice for the participants. So a big thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this session.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much. And we'll be making sure to kind of loop you into the follow-on sort of correspondence with us. And a big thank you also from our colleagues. I know you guys are doing a lot of work within ACRA, the program we're working in. So we're excited to see that grow and those extend. So yeah, really nice to connect.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Patricia.
Thank you.
Well, following Patricia and the really kind of insightful sort of energy and showing like I think everyone would agree that the numbers and the scale that they've reached by kind of harnessing the power of storytelling is really, really amazing. So we're just going to go on with our next session, where we'll be discussing a little bit more around communicating evidence. And then we'll be discussing sort of linking on to what Patricia was discussing about engaging a mass audience. So thinking about how you in your work can also harness the power of mass movements. And we'll make sure I'll be checking the chat box. If there's any questions, please just put your hand up at any time. Remember, this is a very sort of informal, and we're here to learn and exchange. So please, just any questions, just stop me and we'll have a discussion. And Constance will also be taking the next case study around mass movements. So one of the things we wanted to describe, and this is a blog that's just come out, I think based on COP26, we thought it was really interesting as a way to get across how do you, one of the questions that came out in last week's session was to say, what angle do you pick about climate change? How do you actually report it? Where do you, I guess, like, which part of it do you discuss? So we've tried to break down some of these key things to sort of bring across maybe strings or narratives that you could bring into the different elements of how you could report about agriculture or climate change. I think one of the key strings that's been coming out recently, and this has been a lot of the change in journalism around climate change, is really using the term climate emergency. Because with the word change, I think a lot of media houses felt that by just saying climate change, it wasn't really getting across the urgency, and that so many kind of media houses, for example, the Guardian newspaper in the UK, made a decision, and this happened to a lot of the media houses globally, to say we're now going to at all times call it climate emergency. So I think one of the narratives that's come out really strongly is Africa is the, I guess, in terms of the most vulnerable, in terms of how many people are being impacted from this climate emergency as key victims of impacts that are happening globally, but a lot of the changes are happening within Africa. So in terms of the extreme weather events and the knock-on effect, drawing key things in terms of, we have a really rapidly rising population. I think it was Chimwemwe there was mentioning about youth, and Africa's bill to be the youth continent. We're going to have the biggest proportion of youth population across the world. So how do we really draw linkages in our reporting around climate change to talk about youth, to talk about rising populations and poverty and migration and conflict? How do you start to link many of these things within a story, but also how do you make a story have a spin that's going to allow an editor or a program to launch it? And I think, again, we just talked in the earlier session about evidence, and one of the things around quantitative. So is there a story headline you could bring in terms of why as a community we're pushing for 1.5 degrees? Why are we saying this is so critical? Can you then draw statistics such as 40 million people would be pushed into extreme poverty by 2030? So this is trying to say, bring in some kind of compelling facts around what's happening and why, and how do you bring that into the reporting that you're making? I think a really strong narrative from an African perspective that's also come out from some of these recent analysis from the media is, how do we get across also that a lot of our policies and our programs should not be dictated in terms of donors. So really a lot of research and climate change academics in institutions are not being consulted for their advice. So instead of different donor programs will be decided by people living outside of the continent, and then they'll be directing where the program should be going and what investment should be made. And it was really highlighted the media could have a really strong role to change this narrative, to show how good the research is and how powerful African policy and institutions are to help shape where different investment needs to happen in Africa, and how that coordination could happen. And I think one of the key arguments also that's really come out is this idea around the polluter pays principle. And this is really the crux of some of the arguments and why a lot of the negotiations at COP26 fail. And often this is quite difficult to report, or doesn't get reported in the most accurate way in terms of how the media picks this up. And really, in terms of, I think we showed at the beginning around some of these political agreements, and one of them being the Paris Agreement, which was signed in 2015, is really addressing where has the greatest loss happening, and where is the damage, and who should pay for that. And really, a lot of the negotiating agreements that come from the developing countries is to say that they haven't really they haven't really contributed to this crisis. They haven't gone through a lot of their industrialization cycles. They haven't burnt a lot of greenhouse gases. So it should be those nations that have already done that to help pay for us to go through an energy transition, which is less harmful. And so it's trying to bring across that those countries that have already polluted, how do we get them to pay to ensure that countries that are already going through development don't have to pay as well, and we can have a cleaner energy transition. So in amongst all of this, and I'm sure it would be really great to hear examples from people in terms of misinformation. It's really to say, reporting around climate information, there is a lot of, one of the kind of key issues is around this status of misinformation and essentially fake news in some places, and catching headlines that are going to be compelling and work. And so a lot of work that's, so we've just taken an example of an article that's just come out last week around describing misinformation. And this was looking across a number of articles across the world. And they surveyed media, basically different people who read media, to see what is the impact. And so fake headlines, which were interpreted by people in terms of scientists disagree on the cause of climate change. Scientists believe the sun has impacted the Earth's temperature. Carbon dioxide levels are tiny. They can't make a difference. And one such as melting an ice cube in a measuring cup full of water doesn't raise the water level. So melting icebergs cannot raise sea levels. So there's these kind of fake headlines, which are and part of articles which are a little bit hard to interpret sometimes. And these sort of headlines, it felt like the public weren't able to interpret them or really point them out as fake as easily as you would have expected. And then there's real headlines, which can be more in terms of factual and more compelling in terms of things such as more than 1 million species are at risk of extinction by climate change. Earth had its second warmest year in history in 2019. And actually referring back to one of the difficult things from a media perspective is the temperature records are changing so much that essentially every year on year, it's a record. So it becomes quite hard to make that a news headline when 2020 was the warmest year on record. And so how do we keep maintaining a sort of like news beat cycle when the changes are so rapid every year? So these are just kind of things to think about, and obviously putting a time bound on a headline. So the worst impacts of climate change could be irreversible by 2030. And there's a lot of discussion, and I think we saw the clock earlier in the session, to really show we need to make action by 2030, otherwise we're in a really dangerous position and dangerous place. I'm just watching the time there. Yeah, and in terms of trust, a big thing from a media perspective is when we're thinking about climate information, where do we really trust? And in a survey that was recently completed, this is just work that was done in the last month, and this comes from an example. It's just really say, actually, people really trust their own friends and family to convey information about climate change. And I think building on what Patricia was saying is using the power of networks, and how do you weave in the story and really get people this sort of like mass storytelling movement as a very sort of powerful narrative. So as media people, how do you get skill sets around really unpacking where is the issues with misinformation? So it's about detection. It's about saying, how can we detect where there's online misinformation? Deconstruction. We really need to identify where is the misinformation and really point it out. And debunking, which is to say, okay, if there was misinformation, how do you make sure that people are aware of why? And then that's the deployment, to say, how do we, like they have programs such as Mythbusters, and they were saying, how do we use that sort of thing to debunk climate information, and to we get people really all on the same page of what are the facts, how is climate change caused, what are the impacts, and how do we get people involved? And this is just a bit of a complicated slide, but it's just to show that there is a huge amount of work now with the media in terms of trying to unpack where climate misinformation claims come from. And I think everyone might have seen in the news in the last couple of weeks, major social networks such as Facebook rebranding themselves and changing. And one of the issues is that these large social networks have been seen to be not really engaging enough to stop a misinformation around climate change. And as there's more of a recognition of how critical it is, they're really starting to unpack how do we address misinformation? So is it something about the way people are discussing impacts? Is it something about actually discussing that climate change is not happening? Is it about the cause? So people are not talking about greenhouse gas emissions as the cause, and those are human induced. And then also this issue around climate solutions or climate science being unreliable. So these are sort of major topics or where misinformation comes from. So this would be quite useful in terms of unpacking why it's happening, and within the reporting, making sure that this is not coming in. And I think Dorcas has just said about misinformation being a big challenge in the agricultural sector. And Dorcas, it would be really nice to hear any examples you have. So I'll just quickly stop my share there, and I'll just take a quick question, and then Constance will just take us through about movement building. So Dorcas, maybe you could just quickly take the floor and explain what you're dealing with in terms of misinformation. I don't know if Dorcas, if your mic is working. Dorcas, do you want to give us an example from the agricultural sector? No, I don't hear Dorcas. Okay. And Happy has asked, how do you cross-check information? Okay, Constance, I'll take that question. And then if you want to get loaded for discussing about mass movements. So Happy, I think it's a really good question around how do you cross-check? So depending on who, I think going back to when we were discussing about evidence sources, really saying who are the stakeholders you need to discuss when you're thinking about a climate issue. So you might be reporting about climate information, or you might be talking, again, if we take the deforestation example, you might be taking statistics from one research group or one institution. Cross-checking will be about saying, this fact came from this source. I'm going to then discuss this with several people. And then I'm also going to try and bring in different sources to cross-check information and say, does this look correct? And I think I'd also highlight that a lot of us don't use our intuition enough. We see something and it looks wrong, but we trust it. And I think the key thing is taking your intuition and saying that's a really remarkable statistic. Is this correct? How do I? So I think it's about calling up. And I think like what Patricia was saying is if you can have a more trusted network of some scientists that would be able to cross-check some information, some different institutions, this is really valuable. Margarita has also had a very valuable question about how do we differentiate between misinformation and Indigenous knowledge? And I think that's a very, very interesting. So Constance, you can also help here. But I think in terms of the difference between Indigenous knowledge and misinformation. So you have misinformation, which might skew a statistic, or it might skew for a political cause or reason. So you might say that so we have this with the fossil fuel industry, and Dave showed that that footage on the first training, where basically a senator was trying to show how much land the fossil fuel industry had already purchased to be able to do exploration in the future. So the fossil fuel industry was trying to use misinformation basically by saying that that land was not owned by them, versus Indigenous knowledge might be saying this land needs to be maintained, and we need to, in terms of how nature-based solutions or Indigenous techniques are in terms of land ownership. So I think it's, Margarita, I think you've raised a really good point about bringing in that Indigenous knowledge to reporting and not not linking it in terms of misinformation. So I think it's a really important point, and that might be something we can expand on a little bit more. Constance, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think that's really good. But I guess one of the things, your slide showed that we have lots of different types of information, and it's how critical it is to bring those different types together. And that does sort of harken back to the fact that, you know, you have to talk to a lot of different kinds of stakeholders. So I think there's a difference between also Indigenous knowledge and myths. Right. So a lot of Indigenous knowledge is stuff that we're actually now going back and drawing upon to take care of the planet.
Sure.
So is that okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. Are you happy to go ahead, or would you like me to talk to you?
No, I'm happy to go ahead, and I'm just going to move a bit quickly because I see that we're in light of time, but I think this is something that brings together this idea of what is the science saying and what are the campaigns helping us accomplish in terms of moving forward. So one of the things that's really important, and again, this idea of the youth, you know, we, as one of our colleagues said, you know, youth is the future is becoming a bit cliche, but it's absolutely real. And what we're seeing is that the youth and the use of social media have really transformed into opportunities to organize and educate. So I think that we're going to continue to see these kinds of green influencers, such as I think Vanessa Nakate from Uganda has just been a complete bright light, along with Greta Thunberg from Sweden, where they are really, it's like paying attention, sitting in front of you know, the White House and being there week after week after week to say, we're striking until you pay attention. And as you're seeing the information coming out of COP26, even the march this last weekend was enormous. So you're seeing the youth really rally and move forward. I think that one of the things, this is just an information piece that can backstop us. This Earthrise Studio is a youth-led information project, and they have been able to capture some of the critical information that allows, that gives the story, everything from how we got here to what can we do. So these are part of the resources that we'll make sure are on the website. Right now, what I'd love to talk about is movement building and action, because if you're hearing over the last couple of years, this tree planting campaigns have become very, very important. They're getting a lot of attention. They're becoming fairly competitive. So we just wanted to unpack that a little bit, that planting billions of trees can absolutely help with climate change. What we've seen is that in Ethiopia, for example, they were recorded planting 350 million tree saplings in a single day. And this is also being done in China, and it's being done in India. And so they're starting to see, can we break this record? But the thing is of course, the impacts of tree planting are going to take time. And I thought that this quote was really, really nice, was that often the allure of these bold targets obscure the obstacles of actually seeing these through to grown trees that are sequestering carbon, and that we need to pay attention to the underlying forces. So instead of focusing on planting huge numbers of trees, we really want to focus on growing trees. So these should be growing tree campaigns, because the concept is that for the long haul, we've got to protect and restore the ecosystems beyond the forest and empower communities so they're in a good position to be able to both care for the trees and reap the benefits. And then you're starting to see in the media, and I think we know where this is going, is yes, we can't say it's only going to be tree planting. While nature offers so much of a solution, if we don't cut emissions, we're not going to be able to capture everything through trees. But I think when we're talking about trees, and this is so critical, there are so many kinds of trees. So one of the things that we use is we must have the right tree for the right place. And there are many, many numbers of trees of products that come from trees, as you can see here, from fruit to wood to fodder to medicine. And they serve different purposes in our landscapes and on our plots and on our farms in terms of soil fertility, even sequestering carbon, but controlling erosion, taking care of watersheds to make sure we're capturing the water that does fall, shade, biodiversity, etc. So one of the things that we're very keen on is this idea of, are these trees helping people's livelihoods and helping the ecosystem? But absolutely, trees offer tangible benefits to farmers. They improve our soil quality, they provide shelter, they stabilize the soil against flooding, and they provide these different products that are important for our livelihoods. So there have been some scientists that have stepped up and reviewed the tree planting campaigns and said, we need to pay attention to the following. And I think these are really good points. So there are ways to naturally regenerate trees through just working with the root systems with the trees that are already there, which is very cheap and also effective. We've got a lot of information we could share about that, to ensure that people are using trees that have been historically important or will be important to their livelihoods. Land tenure is always going to play a role. There is such a thing as tree tenure, even if you don't have access tenure over the land. Carbon capture, please don't revert to monocultures. We've seen this idea of the eucalypts or pine trees. And when we go to monocultures, we actually decrease biodiversity and decrease the ability for the trees to help the ecosystem offer the services that we need it to offer when we're considering climate change. So there are many elements that we can keep in mind as we go. And one of the things that I love this is another green piece. Thank you, Sabrina. We need real forests to avoid climate catastrophe, not just tree plantations, which just reinforces that point. And I thought that this was really nice, is the tree planting efforts do focus often on saplings planted or their rate of growth. But we really need to, we don't want to mislead people that they're infinitely possible to absorb everything that we are emitting in terms of our human-caused climate change and carbon emissions. But more and more, we're seeing people pick up on the fact that we need biodiversity, we need to preserve the forests that we have, and get those kinds of metrics into what means success when we have such a tree planting movement. And so I'll end there on that there's no silver bullet to the climate crisis, but tree planting is part of the solution. So if you're in the media and you're trying to get these, a really good point would be to show both sides of the story and even use media to enhance how tree planting is being done. Is it meeting the right causes? Is it being planned for tree growth? So I'm going to stop sharing there. I know we're out of time now. And Sabrina, do you
thank you. No, thanks so much. No, thanks so much, Constance. And I think we'll take any final questions. And I think, Chimwemwe, it's nice in the chat box how you said right tree for right place. And I think that's what we wanted to try and get across there with those mass movements, is often, if you take the Ethiopia example, all of the headlines were more about the number, like record number of trees, X million trees planted. But the media often doesn't use that opportunity to educate. So how could we have used it more in our reporting to say, it's about tree survival, it's about different trees for different uses, and how do you weave in a bigger story than just doing a headline and getting that. So thank you so much, Constance. Constance, there's a question here also. Chimwemwe says, is it necessary to focus on trees that help in preventing soil erosion, as your first question? And then there's another one I'll field now.
I think that you've just hit hit it. It's very important to understand the context. So if you're in an area where you might have a high prevalence of erosion, then it will be important to have trees. And I think one of the things I probably failed to mention is, there is agroforestry, right? Where you're just integrating trees into your agricultural systems and you're enhancing diversity and getting the benefit of these different kinds of trees. So it's context specific.
Sure, that's great. And then Ambita said, is it okay if we focus on economic trees such as avocado or mangoes in relation to carbon sequestration? Which I think is a really useful question as well.
I think it's a great question. And actually there is a center, the World Agroforestry Center, and they have an app where you can really see what are the right trees for the right place across Africa. But I think that it's very dependent. I think, of course, what I'm seeing is that often on farms, people will integrate, fruit trees, they'll integrate fodder trees, they'll integrate trees for wood. And so I think that's really important. But I think the main point here is that when you're doing this mass scaling, don't do monocultures and think about what the people and the land need.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And then, Priska I think is agreeing to say trees can be planted every year. And I think it's great because Priska's maybe had a sort of reflection question to say, what does the media chip into this issue? And so that's why we've kind of used that example around tree planting when we think about sort of wider approaches to climate change and agricultural development. And I think it's really, hopefully that's given some food for thought around different article or sort of angles to how you can report on an issue. So we're just a bit over time, but I want to thank everybody. I think it's been a really insightful session and lots of really great questions and really nice interventions from Patricia, our speaker. So really thank you so much to everyone. We'll meet again on Wednesday for the fourth and final part of this series. We will be hearing from another guest speaker from the government in South Africa who will describe how critical media is in their work in terms of behavior change. And we'll be hearing about the example of the drought in Cape Town as a recent big event. And then we'll be sort of unpacking different elements of using some of these techniques. And we'll also be finally hearing from you about some key next steps and how we continue to build capacity in this area. So we really look forward to seeing everyone. It's going to be a very interactive session on Wednesday, and please, we look forward to seeing you at the same time, and thank you so much. So if everyone wants to put on their cameras, get to say goodbye to everybody. If there's any last questions, we'd love to take just wave everyone, and we'll be closing off shortly.
Thank you, Gabriel, for that question. Let's keep that one going into the next session. Greatly appreciate it. We did, yeah. How do you deal with the dominant opinion, right?
Yeah.
And bring other facts to the story. It's fantastic to see everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Bye.
We'll see you on Wednesday, right?
Yep.
See you, Kelvin.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi, Henry.
Oh, there's Gabriel in the car. Okay, Sandra,
Bye,
thank
Ambita.
you.
Bye.
Great questions.
Henry.
Priska.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Priska, thank you so much. Yes. And thank you to our dear interpreters and Pierre.
Cheers,
and
Mercy.
Sabrina.
Thank you, Mr.
Ambita,
P.
great comment.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Aurela.
Oh, I'm so glad Majorata was able to stay. Thank you. Bye. We'll see you Wednesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Thank you, Chimwemwe.
Felicia. Bye, Dorcas.
Rebecca. Thank you, Mercy.
Thanks, Lorraine. Thanks for the feedback. That's really lovely. Bye, Nita. We need some
Bye.
examples from India next time. Bring some examples for Wednesday, okay? Done deal.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your
Bye-bye.
day. Stay healthy. We'll see you on Wednesday.